Well, hello, everyone. It's been a little tiny bit of time since we've come to you, been coordinating schedules, and we've been a little busy, but thanks for joining us. I'm Tracy Wilson-Rossman from Journal My Health and my co-creator here.
Hi, I'm Joyce Griggs from United States of Healthcare. Nice to see everyone.
And we're fortunate to have back again Todd Keitz. And Joyce, can you just give a little intro for Todd?
Absolutely. Todd, thanks so much for coming back again to the stream. We're really happy to have you to talk about what does it mean to be, a patient advocate when you're also the caregiver for your family member, your loved one, whoever that is. And I just wanted to let everybody know who Todd is. And, you really were in a situation where you had to make some choices, some hard choices about 4.5 years ago. So you have been on this caregiving patient advocate journey for your parents. And that caused you to have to make some career choices as well, which I know couldn't have been easy. And I'm sure a lot of people in our audience can really identify with that because of the impact that this, being a caregiver can have on all aspects of one's life. And so in that, you've now kind of created a new career for yourself, and you are creating services, a suite of services really, that's geared to caregivers and patient advocates. And we're just so delighted to have you back to kind of talk about these important issues and the things that you have to offer, of course, as well.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course.
So why don't we start off with the areas that you believe as an advocate that our audience should be aware of, that you've identified?
Sure. So obviously these are at a high level, and like anything, there are subcategories within the categories, and there's the whole tree of categories. So just sort of running down, and then we'll get into them individually. We have assessing situations. How does one go about that? Scheduling. There's a lot of scheduling that goes into whether you're a caregiver, patient advocate, or a combo like I am. There's patient rights. What are those patient rights? How do you take those into consideration? Coordination. So how do you coordinate everything? There's a lot to coordinate, as you know, and as or the audience likely knows as well. Maybe pulling their hair out like I have. There's research. How do you go about research? How is it accepted, and so forth? Communication. We always use that buzz phrase in society. Oh, there's a good communicator. Well, what is good communication in this realm? And building rapport with healthcare professionals. It's so important. I know from my journey that you run into challenges, and it's just like any relationship. There are personality issues or challenges. We'll say challenges along with that. And then insurance. How do you deal with the insurance aspect of it? That could be a whole job for somebody. And legal things. There are always legal things to consider.
Yeah, I would actually throw in one more thing now that I'm looking at it, of course, coming from my standpoint, the collection of information, right? So I know that could run through each of those things, but having that is really important too.
You mean like all the information that relates to what's happening on a daily basis, with how the person's feeling, right? Just how they're.
So there's that. There's also just, the documents that need to be put together, that's coming from the insurance, it's coming from the doctors. So they're being able to keep all that information together is really, something that we're going to see more and more.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's actually when we get into the assessing situations, that's right under the first bullet point. I'm going to get into that. So it's for sure.
Let's start there then. Okay, so number one is assessing the situation. Tell us what you mean by that, and what are some of the 3 key things that we should think about.
Sure. So when I think about that, I think about how do we distinguish between chronic and acute? Just get right into that. And it's a challenge. The first thing touches on what Tracy was talking about, which is knowing the patient's healthcare history. So whether you're a caregiver, patient advocate, or combo of both, it's really important to first understand what they've been through. Look at the records. I mean, we're always talking from this end about, oh, I wish that doctor really took a look at my records before they gave me advice. Well, it's incumbent upon us to know, because we're going to have to help that healthcare provider often, because when we step back and think about it, this has been a journey for me as well, because I originally thought, well, they're the healthcare person, they should know this. But if we think about it, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients. And for them to stay on top of everybody and the demands that they have from one patient to the next on a daily basis, it's impossible for them. So that's why being a patient advocate especially is such an important role. So again, to your point, it's understanding, knowing that healthcare history.
You know, I know we just had a situation with my dad where he has a pacemaker. There's probably some issue where it needs to be adjusted or medication needs to be adjusted. And it's two different doctors. So it's his heart doctor and then the pacemaker doctor, heart doctor. So we're sitting at the table and I said, did you make your appointments yet? My mother says, oh, well, one doctor didn't get the information from the hospital yet. And I'm like, well, why don't you have that information? Why don't you have that? You have it. Well, they have it. And I said to them, what the issue is with that is if you ran into an emergency, we don't have that information handy for us to be able to advocate for you. So, I think that's part of assessing as well.
Absolutely. To that point, and I'll finish the answer to the question that I brought up. So I'll start with that is I have a book, an online book that I constantly update with what's going on. I share that periodically with my siblings. There are two key contacts. If I'm not available or if I'm traveling for some reason, I share it with them as well, because they're the emergency people when I'm not available.
Right.
And just constantly updating that is very important. I'll go back to the question of how to distinguish between chronic and acute, because that's where it started, which is, you can always call a primary doctor, but the primary doctor isn't necessarily the one to call, because then this comes back to knowing what the person's healthcare is and the situation, because it could be a specialist. So for instance, for a long time, many years, it's hard that I can even say many years at this point, but for many years with my mom, it was the nephrologist, not the primary. The primary is sort of the gatekeeper, but depending upon somebody's condition, it might be a specialist is the one who's really handling the care. So that's that first question. The next one would be how to determine which healthcare provider to call. And it sort of dovetails onto that, which is depends on the symptoms and what's going on. So with my mom, if she's having certain issues, I know this is the nephrologist. If she's having swelling in the legs, it could be a cardiologist, but it could be a nephrologist. And that's where knowing an individual situation, you'll better be able to identify, wait a second, okay, it could be a heart issue, but this was presenting previously as a kidney issue. And so you would call that person first because they have probably a more intimate experience with that. And of course, one thing I always tell people is if you're having trouble breathing, you're having chest pain, etc., call 911. Do not call the doctor.
Just to say that what we're talking about here are not like emergency situations, right? If it's an emergency, you call 911. If it's, oh, I'm having a symptom and it looks like this, like you said, swelling in the leg, this happened before, my nephrologist was the one who helped me with it, we're going to call the nephrologist. So just to be clear.
Yes, and just one more further point on that. I'll give you a perfect example because this is frequent. Not just I've dealt with it with my mom and my dad, is people, it's natural. They don't want to think whatever's going on could be bad, or they're scared of going to the hospital. So they may say, oh, it's just a chest pain, or oh, it's just this. So,
Right.
it's like, it is, let's call 911.
Yeah.
And the third thing under that category of assessing situations, I think we were talking about, was when labs come back. So I'm all over labs. Labs are telltale. They can point to something going awry or what have you. And the reality of the situation is you're going to be on those labs. Ideally, you'll be on those labs well before the doctor, because again, doctors are inundated with so many patients. Think about it. You have one patient, maybe two in my case. Doctors have hundreds. So as soon as that lab pops up on my phone, I get the notice on my chart and I look at them. And so it's assessing, is there truly something wrong, amiss? But let's look at the history. I always go back and look at the history to see, okay, it's not, it's in the relative range. But from there, you can proceed and, okay, everything's okay, or do I need to make a phone call?
Yeah, so important. So important to educate ourselves, right? Like you said, so that when you are assessing it, you have a point of reference. For anybody who's starting out, right? And for anybody who's in the middle, like this is probably a head nodder, but if you're just starting out, like you have to kind of get knowledgeable first so that you know what to compare it to.
Right. And I think that's a big discussion point to have, is like, when do you know to make those calls? And maybe it's not the emergency, but probably erring on the side of caution, you should be, looking to, call the doctor if you're really not sure how to read those labs.
That's right.
Yeah. And like everything, we learn over time through experience. Right. So things that I may have called about 2-3 years ago, now I see it go, okay, right. It's all right. But what I will do if something might be, because you have to look at it, I look at everything holistically. And I think this is important for patient advocates, caregivers to understand, is don't just look at that lab. You'll learn over time, and you'll look at a series of labs, and you'll look at also what's going on with your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, whatever it might be. And look, okay, wait a second. I have to do some critical thinking here, and maybe I should just send a note to the doctor and say, hey, I saw the labs. I know you're really busy. Is this something we should be looking at further?
Okay, so should we move on to number 2, scheduling?
Sure, scheduling. So what are the best ways to go about scheduling appointments? It depends on what's available to you. So you can use MyChart, which is done, like Cleveland Clinic uses MyChart, Memorial Healthcare down here uses MyChart, and there are other systems like MyChart where you can schedule appointments. Some you do right after the doctor appointment. You just, when you're checking out, you make them. Others, so for instance, my mom, because she's a frequent flyer at Cleveland Clinic, she has a care manager that's been assigned to her for years now. And we just actually switched over this past week. So it's now, I'm bringing the new care manager up to speed on different things. And then there's also, of course, you could direct call to an office. So it's a combination of those things. But the one thing that I'll say to especially new caregivers, patient advocates, is don't be afraid to make the call. I would say 99% of the people that I call and have to talk to are so helpful. If they're in that business for a reason.
Are there any tricks for making, like, scheduling these appointments easier? Do you have any suggestions for people?
Yeah, that's great. It leads into my next point. So yes, what I do is use Google Calendar. And so it's really helpful because it makes it easy for me to keep track of it. And I get reminders, and you can set reminders of when you want to get those. And also it's a good way for, if you want to keep your loved one in the know. If you want to keep family members or emergency contacts in the know, you can make them a part of that calendar so that they can see it and they know what's going on. So nothing is a total surprise to them. That can be really helpful. Of course, you can use Outlook, you can use iCal, you can use like for people who are really busy, you can use a CRM product. You can use a customer relationship management product to do that as well.
Well, it sounds like we could have a whole other show just on the tools that are available that we can use.
Truly.
Why don't we go into coordination? Because that sounds like sort of like the next piece.
It is. And I think there's a good conduit to that off of the scheduling. They go hand in hand, which is, are there any tricks to make it easier? And so before you're doing your coordinating and scheduling, it's really important to know who, I hate to use the business term, but who your stakeholders are. It's who are those key people? Is it a sibling? Is it another parent? Is it a friend, etc.? Know who they are, who's responsible for what. Make sure it's clear with them that you'll be responsible for this. We have a conversation, you're responsible for that. And also knowing their availability. Generally available, so get that right at the beginning. What's your general availability? Can I work, I can help out on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays in the afternoon for my brother, or, my aunt, she can say, okay, yeah, I can help out any Wednesday at all. Know all of that so that when you're going into coordinating and scheduling, you're looking and go, okay, you know what? I can make this will work. I can call my Aunt Sharon, or I can call my brother. That's really important. It's going to make your job a lot easier. And if there's a care manager involved, all the better, because the care manager, you will take that information and be really helpful. And I guess some of the other stuff with coordinating is, are there other resources that can help? Because sometimes the people you have on your team aren't enough. So are there other resources? And there are. Whether you're comfortable with them or not is another thing. Everybody has a different situation and different needs. There are community organizations that can help. There's Catholic services, there's Jewish family services, there's many different organizations where you can call and maybe get transportation, where they can help you coordinate that if you have nobody that can help. The big thing about that is don't necessarily think you're stuck. Call and find out. And if you're really stuck, call the healthcare facility, call the doctor where you need to make that appointment and say, hey, I'm really in a bind right here. Do you know of anyone or a service that could possibly help?
It's a great point. Can we just take one segue into, you mentioned care managers. I know we mentioned it a couple of times. What is a care manager and how does somebody get one?
So the care manager that I've been referring to, so Cleveland Clinic, and I imagine other facilities as well. My mom has so many different comorbidities that they assess and they say, okay, we really need to have somebody internally who's checking in with this family once a month to see what's going on, how they're doing, even though they see in the records we're there every week. They want to get a sense for that. And they want to make sure I was just on the phone with the new one yesterday and she's lovely. And as was the previous one, but so helpful because I can call them at any point and say, hey, look, I am having a really tough time getting into, I won't name doctors, but I get a really tough time getting to this doctor. He's an incredible doctor and we love him and his nurse, but there is a gatekeeper in that way. And so that care manager can instantly send an urgent note that they will see from the care manager that says, okay, we need something answered. So the care manager helps with that kind of issue and can help coordinating and getting services done.
But I was going to say, not everyone has a Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic. I know up here in Philly, we've got, if you're in the University of Pennsylvania care group, they do have some care management.
Yeah.
There may be some other hospital groups like that, but sometimes you are managing your own care and you're dealing with, different hospital systems. So that coordination is definitely challenging.
That's most of the time.
Yeah,
Right.
it's most of the time, although it's just worth saying that we
Oh, yeah.
should all ask, wherever you're getting your care, ask about this service. If they have it, how do you qualify for it, et cetera? Because not to ask is probably, and then you may get a yes or you may get a no, but the important thing is to ask first. Yeah, you're right, Tracy. Not everybody's going to have access to it.
But there may be, to your point about asking, maybe the hospital that doesn't have a built-in care manager like Cleveland Clinic may know other people who could help with that, or may actually have an outside service. So always ask.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yep. If you don't ask, you don't know.
Well, we seem to be out of time right now. So we will be continuing this conversation in another week. So please be on the lookout. Thank you, Todd and Joyce, for this time. And we're gonna continue these very important points so that you are ready for any situation as it comes up. Todd, Joyce, thank you so much. We're barely scratching the surface on all of these, and thank you very much for your time.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I love this. I know it's important to your audiences and as well as mine. So thanks so much.